If a sudden strike vaporized every single political and military leader in Moscow today, the nuclear retaliation would still come. Right now, deep beneath the frozen Russian steppe, an autonomous master computer is waiting for its creators to die. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't hesitate. Once it confirms the end of its nation, it will automatically launch hundreds of ballistic missiles, erasing civilization as we know it. This isn't a Cold War myth. This is Perimeter, the fully operational doomsday device known as the Dead Hand. Welcome to the modern ledger. To understand why such a creation exists, we have to travel back to the most paranoid years of the 20th century. By the early 1980s, the Cold War had ceased to be a chess match of political maneuvering and had devolved into a mathematical problem of sheer survival. The United States had begun deploying Pershing II intermediate-range ballistic missiles in West Germany. These missiles were fast, highly accurate, and incredibly close to the Soviet border. A launch from West Germany could reach the heart of Moscow in less than 6 minutes. 6 minutes is not enough time to wake a head of state. It is not enough time to convene a war cabinet, verify radar data, or contemplate the moral weight of global annihilation. For the Soviet leadership under Yuri Andropov, this mathematical reality was terrifying. They realized that a surprise American decapitation strike could vaporize the Kremlin, the Ministry of Defense, and the General Staff before anyone could even reach for the physical keys required to launch a retaliatory strike. The Soviet nuclear arsenal, the largest the world had ever seen, would be rendered utterly useless, sitting silent in its underground silos while the nation lay in ruins. The fear of a decapitation strike drove Soviet military planners into a corner. They needed a guarantee. They needed a system that would assure the United States that even if Moscow was completely erased from the map in a fraction of a second, the retaliation would still come. But how do you command a nuclear retaliatory strike when the commanders are already gone? The answer they designed was as brilliant as it was terrifying. An automated system of sensors, logic gates, and command rockets that would take the human element out of the end of the world. The Soviets called this system Perimeter. In the West, when its existence was finally whispered in secret intelligence briefings, it became known by a much more visceral name: the Dead Hand. The core philosophy of Perimeter was a radical departure from traditional military command. Typically, a nuclear launch requires a direct, active command from the top. Perimeter turned this logic completely on its head. It was built to act as a system that is constantly being held back, waiting for the hand holding it to release. It operates on a sequential logic gate, a series of automated questions that must all be answered with a chilling affirmative before the final sequence is initiated. Deep beneath the granite of the Ural Mountains, inside a heavily fortified underground bunker, sits a master control computer. It is isolated from the outside world, except through specialized communication channels and a network of highly sensitive environmental sensors. These sensors are distributed across the vast expanse of the Russian landmass, buried in concrete wells and anchored to bedrock. They do not look up at the sky. They look down into the earth and out into the atmosphere, measuring 3 specific variables: seismic tremors, atmospheric pressure, and ionizing radiation. Under normal conditions, the system sleeps. But if the sensors suddenly register an unprecedented seismic shockwave one that matches the precise signature of a ground-penetrating nuclear blast. The system wakes up. The first logic gate is triggered. The computer does not immediately launch a strike. It enters a state of high alert and begins checking its other sensors. Does the seismic shock correlate with a sudden spike in atmospheric pressure? Is there a massive rise in ionizing radiation levels across the region? If the sensors detect these anomalies, the system concludes that a nuclear detonation has indeed occurred on domestic soil. The system then moves to the second logic gate, which is perhaps the most critical step in preventing an accidental apocalypse. It attempts to communicate with the general staff in Moscow, the alternate command posts, and the national leadership. It pings the secure communication lines, looking for a sign of life, a code, or an override signal. Under normal circumstances, the military command would quickly respond, proving that they are alive, in control, and capable of making decisions. If the system receives this response, it stands down. The human chain of command remains unbroken. But if the system pings the Kremlin and receives only static, if it contacts the alternate command centers and hears nothing but the hum of dead air, the second gate is breached. The computer assumes that the leadership has been eliminated, that the head of the state has been severed from the body. At this point, the system activates its final, most highly guarded protocol. Control is transferred to a small group of duty officers stationed deep inside the fortified bunker. These are not generals or politicians. They are mid-level technical officers whose sole job is to sit in the dark and wait. Even in this automated system, the Soviets hesitated to give a computer ultimate authority over the launch keys. They kept a human safety switch at the very end of the line. If the computer presents the data, the seismic activity, the radiation, the complete silence from Moscow, the duty officers must make a choice. They do not need to target individual missiles or coordinate a complex military strategy. Their only task is to press a button that confirms the system's analysis. By doing so, they hand complete control over to the machine. Once this final human permission is granted, the dead hand begins its work. The system commands the launch of a series of unique rockets known as command missiles. These are modified intercontinental ballistic missiles, but instead of carrying nuclear warheads, their nose cones contain powerful radio transmitters. As these command missiles soar high into the upper atmosphere, crossing the sky above the devastated nation, they begin to broadcast a continuous, high-intensity radio signal. This signal is not a message of peace. It is a broadcast of launch codes. Down on the ground, in hardened concrete silos scattered across thousands of miles of wilderness, the automated receivers of the remaining nuclear forces pick up the command rocket's broadcast. Without any human operators in those remote silos having to turn a single key or enter a single password, the silos open. The guidance systems, pre-programmed with coordinates for major targets across the Western Hemisphere, align themselves. The engines ignite. Hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles lift off into the sky, launched by the dying breath of a nation that no longer exists. The sheer horror of this design lies in its cold, mathematical inevitability. It is a system built on the assumption of death. It does not seek to defend, to negotiate, or to assess the political landscape. It simply exists to ensure that if one side dies, both sides die. When details of this system began to leak to the West in the late 1980s and early 1990s, foreign policy experts and military strategists were stunned. They were troubled not just by the technological audacity of the system, but by a profound, baffling, logical paradox. In the theory of nuclear deterrence, a weapon only works if your opponent knows you have it. If your adversary does not know that you have built an automated doomsday machine that will fire even if your leadership is destroyed, then the system cannot deter a surprise attack. A secret weapon of mass retaliation is useless as a deterrent. Yet the Soviet Union kept Perimeter a closely guarded secret, never officially acknowledging its existence to the public or to their adversaries during the height of the Cold War. Why would a state build a machine to prevent a war, but keep that machine a secret? Some historians suggest that the Soviet leadership was deeply embarrassed by the system's existence. To admit to the world that they had built a device capable of ending civilization without human intervention was to admit to a terrifying loss of control. It was an acknowledgement that their political and military structures were so fragile and their fear of their adversary so absolute that they had to rely on a mechanical ghost to guard their sovereignty. Others argue that Perimeter was never meant to be a permanent strategic deterrent, but rather a temporary, highly classified safety net designed to prevent their own nervous military officers from launching a premature strike out of panic. If the generals knew that a reliable automated system was backing them up, they would be less likely to react hastily to false radar readings. The history of the nuclear age is a history of terrifying close calls, where human intuition was the only thing standing between survival and extinction. Two specific events illustrate just how fragile this balance truly is, and why the removal of the human element from nuclear command is so dangerous. On September 26, 1983, a Soviet military officer named Stanislav Petrov was on duty at a secret bunker south of Moscow. His job was to monitor the early warning satellite system, which scanned the American landscape for signs of a missile launch. Suddenly, shortly past midnight, the sirens shrieked. The main screen flashed with a single blood-red word: launch. The computer indicated that the United States had launched an intercontinental ballistic missile heading directly for the Soviet Union. Soon, the screen updated, indicating a second launch, then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. The protocol was clear, unambiguous, and rigid. Petrov was supposed to report the detection up the chain of command immediately. In the high-tension atmosphere of 1983, such a report would have almost certainly triggered a massive, immediate retaliatory strike. But Petrov did not pick up the phone. He sat in the flashing red light of the bunker, his heart pounding, and he hesitated. He looked at the data and felt a deep, gut-level skepticism. He reasoned that if the United States were launching a first strike, they would send hundreds of missiles to overwhelm Soviet defenses, not just 5. He also knew that the satellite system was relatively new and prone to errors. Relying on his instinct, Petrov chose to classify the alert as a false alarm. His gamble paid off. It was later revealed that the satellite had mistaken the reflection of sunlight off the tops of high-altitude clouds for the thermal signatures of missile launches. One man's willingness to doubt the machine saved the world. A similar close call occurred on January 25, 1995. Russian radar operators detected a missile launch off the coast of Norway. The radar profile matched that of a submarine-launched American Trident missile, and the trajectory indicated it was heading toward Moscow. The Russian military went on high alert, and the nuclear briefcase, the Cheget, was opened and presented to President Boris Yeltsin. For several tense minutes, Yeltsin and his top generals watched the radar track, knowing they had less than 10 minutes to decide whether to launch a devastating counterstrike. Fortunately, the Russian leadership chose to wait. The missile did not head toward Russian airspace, but instead drifted harmlessly out to sea. It was later revealed to be a Norwegian scientific research rocket studying the Northern Lights. Although Norway had notified the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the launch weeks in advance, the information had failed to reach the radar operators. Once again, human skepticism and the ability to hesitate in the face of alarming data prevented a global catastrophe. The Cold War officially ended with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The red flag was lowered over the Kremlin, the Berlin Wall fell, and the world breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing that the threat of sudden, total nuclear annihilation had finally passed into history. But military systems of this scale do not simply vanish when treaties are signed. Perimeter was not decommissioned. In fact, evidence suggests that the system has not only been maintained, but has undergone significant modernization to adapt to the digital age. This realization brings us to the modern era, where the existence of a semi-automated nuclear trigger presents entirely new and unpredictable dangers. Today, the primary threat is no longer just deliberate, calculated aggression. It is the vulnerability of aging systems, the rise of sophisticated cyber warfare, and the blinding speed of digital decision-making. In the 20th century, military networks were physically isolated, protected by vast distances and thick concrete. Today, no system is entirely immune to digital penetration, signal spoofing, or software manipulation. If a highly sophisticated actor were to feed false data into the environmental sensors of a system like the dead hand, simulating the seismic and atmospheric pressures of a nuclear detonation, while simultaneously jamming communication lines, the machine might conclude that its creators are dead, even if they are sitting peacefully in their offices. Furthermore, modern hypersonic missiles can reach their targets far faster than the Pershing II missiles of the 1980s. The time window for a human leader to verify an attack and make a rational decision has been compressed from minutes to mere seconds. As this window narrows, the temptation to rely more heavily on automated systems like Perimeter grows. We are building systems that assume our demise, and in doing so, we create a world where our survival depends entirely on the flawless operation of silicon, wires, and aging code. The story of Perimeter is not just a dark chapter of history. It is an ongoing reality. The sensors remain buried deep within the earth, quietly measuring the vibrations of the ground, the pressure of the air, and the level of radiation. The command rockets sit in their hardened silos, their transmitters silent but ready. The machine is waiting, listening to the ambient noise of a busy, fragile world, prepared to execute its silent, final duty the moment the silence becomes absolute. In 1983 and 1995, humanity survived for one simple reason. A human being hesitated. But the dead hand was built specifically to eliminate human hesitation. Today, in an age of hypersonic missiles and advanced cyber warfare, the greatest threat isn't a deliberate strike. It's a digital glitch that wakes up a mechanical ghost. What do you think? Are we safer relying on automated doomsday machines? Or is a catastrophic cyber error inevitable? Drop your theories in the comments. And to unearth more classified shadow files, subscribe to The Modern Ledger.